TC Jewfolk is supported by Maslin LLP, a Minneapolis commercial law firm dedicated to providing solutions for businesses, supporting the community, and advancing civil rights for more than 65 years. With particular appreciation of partner Leora Maccabee's contributions as a founder of TC Jewfolk, Maslin is proud to uphold the legacy of our founders Samuel H. Maslin, Marvin Borman, Hy Edelman, and Irving Brand. We are committed to serving both the community and the profession, as well as providing an exceptional standard in the practice of law. From corporate counsel to bet the company litigation, Maslin LLP. Online at maslon.com. Shana Tova to all. Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I sit down with Riv Shapiro, the new arts and culture producer at the Minnesota JCC. Riv talks about their short film that's being featured for the first time at the Twin Cities Jewish Film Festival, how they curated this year's festival, and how their Judaism, queerness, and art intersect to make them the person they are on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Riv Shapiro, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are the new arts and culture producer.
Yes,
is that the
right
title? At the Minnesota JCC. Mazel tov on the job.
Thank you.
For starters. And I guess, secondly, what does that mean, being a producer? Because obviously the word producer means a lot of things in lots of different spaces.
Yes.
So what does it mean in this particular space?
So in this particular space, it means that I'm the producing director of the Twin Cities Jewish Film Festival, which happens annually in the fall, and the Twin Cities Jewish Humor Festival, which happens annually in the winter. And perhaps there might be a music festival in our future. That is something that we're dreaming into, and it's definitely a big passion of mine. So perhaps that. It also will entail producing shorter events and programs and series outside of those festivals, but those are kind of my main domain. And then everything else is kind of gravy. But what's really exciting to me is that I get to bring in a lot of different facilitators and musicians and artists that I have connected with over the years to bring content to the Minnesota JCC and also connect with local artists, and after being away for 7 years. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That sounds amazing. And I love the idea of the music festival. Obviously, you may know this, that both your boss, Steve Mintz, and the Minnesota JCC executive or CEO, Mike Waldman, who in the interest of full disclosure is my cousin, are both musicians in a band together. I don't know if they've shared that with you.
I think actually Michael Waldman had to leave, but yes, it has been shared with me that they were playing together. Steve was devastated, but I know that they're both musicians.
Oh, I did not know he left the band.
That's my understanding from Steve.
Well, I know that COVID hit, and then obviously performances have become sort of a weird mystery over the course of the last, 18, 19 months at this point. So I suppose it wouldn't surprise me if there was a shakeup in the band lineup of Stereo Kitchen. But yes, I mean, you definitely have supporters of music in those two individuals.
Yes.
So you are a Minnesota native. Steve told me you went to high school, I believe, with Allie Greenstein.
I did. Yeah, we went to Armstrong High School. I also went to Herzl Camp with Allie Greenstein.
Okay.
And several members of the other folks you've had on the podcast.
Yes.
So.
For sure. And it's funny, Armstrong is actually where my oldest child goes, who you saw in the background running off to get to, it is Tech Week. Today's the last dress rehearsal. Today, as we are recording this, obviously, by the time people listen to this, the run of Hamlet will have ended. But it is Tech Week.
Hamlet.
But we are currently in the middle of Tech Week and the last dress rehearsal for Hamlet at Armstrong High School.
Wow.
So it's very cool. So you are from this area. Now, when we were talking about setting this up, you had mentioned, both Central Time and Pacific Time. I know you had been in the Bay Area. Are you still out in the Bay Area?
I am in the Bay Area at this moment in time that we're
Okay.
recording this. I I got this job in August, and I'm kind of doing a little back and forth right now and looking for housing. So I'm acutely in the moment of transition. But September was the Chagim, and also my brother got married in Hawaii last week.
Oh, Mazel
So
Tov.
thank you. So had a little bit going on, and a cross country move did not fit with
So,
that.
so wait, you were just emailing me like from vacation in Hawaii to set this up. You were emailing me from your brother's wedding to set this up.
That's correct. Yeah.
That is wild. Okay. So now, now you're back. It is early October by the time people are listening to it. You mentioned the film festival. It kicks off on Saturday night, the 16th. Given that you've just come into the job over the last couple of weeks, how much were you a part of the programming for this year's festival?
So, yeah, I came into the job early to mid August, and thank God for our volunteer curator, Walter Elias, who has been such an amazing help to this whole process, and also Robin Awend. So, thank you to Walter and Robin Awend for their incredible support. It wasn't their job to produce the film festival, but they got things running so that I could step in, and it was a lot, but not absurd. So Walter had created a spreadsheet of like 150 Jewish films, and with screening links for most of them, and some of them he had rated and he had highlighted his favorite ones. So he gave me a list to start from of what he thought were really the best picks for this year's festival. So I started by watching that list and kind of making some decisions and finding ones to add, and choosing between alternates. Likewise, big shout out to Bill Cooper and the Twin Cities Film Festival, who curated our shorts blocks this year. So they ran our Film Freeway account, they watched all the submissions and suggested the shorts lineup. Side note, my film is one of those shorts that's in the narrative block. And I just want to set the record now that I submitted and had that accepted before I applied for this position. But this will be both my first time directing a film festival and my first time having a film in a film festival.
Okay, so this is very exciting. So since you just mentioned it now, I think let's talk about your film, and then we can get into sort of the rest of the festival. Because again, we have only a couple of weeks, and we will have links in the show notes, and later next week we will have the full article with all of the schedule and how you can buy tickets. Plus, all of the films are now up on the calendar on tcgfolk.com/events. You can find the list of everything and when you can watch it there. But your film in the shorts block is called Held.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the concept for this film and how you kind of went about uh, shooting it and putting it together over the course of the last, well, I guess however long it took you to put together a 6-minute film.
Yeah, so this film came out of my participation in the Atik Makers Kollel. Another big shout out. Look them up, atikmakers.org, ATIQ. So Rabbi Ariel Mays and Adina Polin started that kollel, and it's a 4 or 5 month scholar artisan journey. So we're studying Chassidut, Kabbalah, the Sefirot, and we're creating something through the map of the Sefirot. So starting at Keter and going all the way to Malchut. So it's kind of following the Kabbalistic divine map for creation with our own process of creation. And the prompt for this year's program was, how do we embody Jewish ritual in ever renewed ways? So I went into this kollel knowing that I wanted to work with tefillin, which was a new ritual in my life and had come through a moment of real grief and isolation in the summer of 2020, when I was in a particular moment where I really had limited access to human contact, and also was grieving the sudden death of my friend Yonim Schweig in an accident, a drowning accident. And he was the first person to invite me to wrap tefillin. That was not something that I grew up with at all. And I really thought it was because of gender until I started talking about it and sharing about it. And I found that my conservative friends from the Twin Cities actually had grown up with it across the gender spectrum. And so I realized that it was both gender and denomination.
Interesting.
So it was just not something that was at all presented to me as an option. And after, it was actually the day that I heard of Yonim's death, and I was really mourning that we actually never got to wrap together and I never got to learn from him. Someone who was subletting at my house just brought up in conversation that she had recently begun rapping, and she offered to teach me. So I felt the power of that alignment, and wrapped tefillin for the first time while I was mourning for him and feeling this need to really have physical contact. I'm really a very physical person, and touch is an important love language for me. So being without human contact was really difficult, and being able to wrap my body in leather and feel held by my tradition, by my ancestors, by God, was really important to me. So I knew that I wanted to work with that in the kollel. I thought I was going to make something physical. This program was really for creating tangible works of art. And as a musician and a filmmaker and a dancer, I rarely do that. I rarely make things with my hands these days. So I thought I was going to make some alternative tefillin set that people could maybe make at home and experience being wrapped or something like that. And that's not what happened. That's not what happened through the process. It was the time of vaccination. I got vaccinated pretty early in February and March as an outdoor educator, as an in-person educator in California. And so I wanted to have some sort of ritual that would help me mark this transition into coming back into contact with people. And this was such a theme I was exploring with tefillin, was being held, contact, isolation, intimacy, longing. And so I kind of drew on my training at the Tamalpa Institute for movement-based expressive art therapy, which is an institute in Marin County in Northern California, where I learned methods that had been created by Anna Halprin and her daughter, Daria Halprin. And I used that scoring process to conceive of how I might ritualize this moment that was partly scripted and partly open to what would happen. And so I was extremely, extremely fortunate to have people in my community with these creative skills to offer who were willing to support the project. So the amazing Francesco Pasalacqua, a friend of mine, filmed this piece. And our friend Kristen Rolofsson was the other dancer in the piece. And I knew kind of some of what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out. So it was very much a process-based piece. But I knew that I would be wrapping the tefillin, I would be dancing and kind of interpreting that process of wrapping and being held by the tefillin through dance. And there would be a piece where Kristen and I start separate, wearing our masks, and come together into contact at some point. And the first time that we touch in the film is also the first time that we touched since, years. Yeah. COVID and however long since we'd seen each other. So the film cuts between these two things, and it kind of gives a window into my experience of wrapping tefillin that blurs the boundaries between memory, ritual, dream. It kind of is it's explicitly, or it's intentionally ambiguous,
Okay.
and it's meant to just kind of be an experience. It's like, what would it look like if you just opened my soul while I'm wrapping tefillin in that particular moment as well?
So, because it feels like it's so of the moment, you're trying to capture something very raw in that moment. A lot of times with films, like you'll shoot you'll shoot it multiple times, maybe from different angles. Were you able to do that with something like this and still be able to capture that very raw feeling?
So they were both leaving for Mexico the following day to work on a project, and we actually had quite a limited amount of time. So that was a huge constraint that we had to work with, more than what you're talking about.
Wow. Okay.
So we filmed the process of me and Kristen coming together twice, and I didn't feel like the energy was lost in doing it a second time because it was totally different.
Hmm.
Um, we didn't have an opportunity to reshoot the end, and I ended up really not liking how we had this whole process where we take off each other's masks and everything, and it just didn't work for me. So I had to kind of navigate around that in the editing process, but I actually would have done it differently. I think that that part of the ritual ended up being just for me and not for the film.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it sounds like a very exciting opportunity that you're able to have by having this film in as part of the festival. And again, like you said, nothing that you had nothing to do with it being accepted into the festival.
And I submitted it thinking that I would be relatively anonymous in sharing it and not the face of the festival.
Yeah.
So I would not have actually chosen to lead with this as my introduction into this new professional role, just simply because it's very personal and vulnerable.
Sure.
Um, but Robin really encouraged me, like, you know what? It's great. It's perfect that you're doing it. We're lucky to have that.
But that feels sort of what art should be, right? It should be personal. It should be vulnerable. And as people get to know you in this new professional role you've taken on, it gives people an opportunity to get some insight into you as a Jew, as an artist, as a human being, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think just it feels like a coming out. Like I've already come out as queer and as genderqueer to my family and to my friends, but it's also my first film where I'm dancing in a film. It's I have this contact improv dance with another person who gets read as female. And actually, I think this is hilarious. When I got access to our spreadsheets that talk about our shorts while they were being curated, the
Yeah.
synopsis that was written for my film was lesbian music video. Nothing, no mention of to fill in. Like, just, so
It feels like in a Jewish context, maybe you lead with it to fill in. Maybe.
the person who wrote that was gay and not Jewish.
Ah,
So that's the context,
so you're saying it's all in the eye of the beholder.
I suppose. But I laughed long and hard about that.
That's very funny. So as for the rest of the festival, as you watched and you clicked links and you sort of did the research, what was it about the films that you picked that you thought would make A, for a good festival, and B, sort of put your personal stamp on this
Hmm.
as your first the first festival that you're curating here in Minnesota?
Yeah. One thing that's really important to me working in media is being very aware that we get our ideas about what's possible from media,
Hmm.
from what's represented, like what kinds of stories, who's the lead character, what are these stories that we're seeing. And growing up non binary, closeted, and queer, I didn't see myself reflected in media. And so I know that a lot of other people in other marginalized identities have that experience. And that's definitely something that is at the core of how I want to curate these media, whatever festival it is, just
Sure.
to increase representation and expand people's idea of what's possible and have people see themselves reflected. So, unfortunately, I throughout watching all these films, I was like, who is going to make a beautiful narrative film about the golden age of Sepharad? Like, I need that film. There's so many stories that I think would be amazing that are just not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I was able to find some that I'm really excited to share. One that was actually our latest film added, so folks may not have seen it in the initial lineup, is Ziara, which is a documentary about a French Moroccan Jew who goes back to her roots in Morocco and visits all these various pilgrimage sites, because Ziara, pilgrimage, is a custom in both Judaism and Islam. And what you have in Morocco now are Muslims who are tending the sites of Jewish saints, tending these pilgrimage sites. And they're
Wow.
maintaining cemeteries and they're welcoming people. And it's really beautiful. So that was a story I wanted to make sure to tell. It's also quite heartbreaking because the Muslims are really sad that the Jews left. And it's kind of an ongoing mystery of like, what happened? We really were so symbiotic. So that's
And,
one story.
and I've heard that from family that's that had visited Morocco and had visited some of those sites and had felt like it really was, that they felt bad
Yeah.
that we had left.
Yeah. It was a huge loss.
Yeah. Well, that sounds amazing. I actually don't think that's one I had on my on my list, so I'll have to make sure we get that added to the calendar too, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, that's on October 26th. And there's a documentary called They Ain't Ready for Me, which is about a Black Jewish rabbinical student who may now have been ordained as a rabbi, Tamar Manasseh,
Okay.
who is a mother who was living in Chicago and decided to just set up a chair on a street corner where there had been a lot of gun violence. And she invited other mothers to join her and started Mothers Against Senseless Killings, or MASK. And just every day they would go and sit on the corner, build relationships with people, feed people, and bring people together. And it follows her kind of through the course of a year in the Jewish calendar, hosting a Passover Seder and having people in a sukkah, and and we get to really learn what is possible for creating safety in our communities. Like, what do we really need?
Right.
And for her, it's a lot about, she says a few times in the film, you don't shoot somebody that you had dinner with.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for that film.
And that it's interesting what you said about the idea of looking at what we need for community safety. I mean, that's it's something we've written a lot about at CCG Folk over the course of the last,
Right.
well, many a long time. And I know these are ongoing conversations in the both Minneapolis and St. Paul, Jewish and secular communities.
Absolutely.
Tamar is ordained as a rabbi. She was, I
Amazing.
think, her ordination was mid-July.
Oh, wow.
So she is a rabbi.
That's
So
great.
that is a very cool. That is very cool. And when I looked at the synopses for the movies, that one really stood out to me. That one seems like it's going to be really an interesting documentary.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit of what stood out to you?
I think the idea of, to me, it goes back to one of the first things you said in talking about picking the films. It's representation. It's that, we aren't this homogenous white presenting religion, not by a long shot. And I think we've tried to paper over that a lot over the years. And I think that having a film like this featuring somebody who's now a rabbi, who is a long career as an activist, who is proudly Black and Jewish, it means a ton
Mm-hmm.
uh, in terms of helping, I think, the broader community and the broader Jewish community see what is possible. And I think that's really important. And I think more, I think it would be important even if George Floyd hadn't been murdered. But I think based on what we had experienced last Memorial Day and everything that has gone on since, I think it amps up the importance of a film like this telling a story like this even more so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that it spoke to you in that way, and I really hope that this can be a film that brings us together as a community.
I would hope so. I would hope so. I think the you know the subject and subject matter are important and fascinating and different, but also very much something that is needed to be talked about more in the Jewish community, not just here in the Twin Cities, but more broadly. Is the that Jews come in many different colors, and it's time to recognize and be more accepting and understanding of that.
Absolutely. And I'll dovetail off of that into another film if we have time for that.
Please, absolutely.
Okay. So you also, at the beginning, you asked about kind of what was my involvement in creating the program.
Yeah.
And so the shorts were mostly curated when I came in, but I did a little bit of swapping. The feature films, Walter had suggested several, and I I think that I actually included all of his top picks because they were great, and I really trust him. Um, and then we also kind of worked on the final lineup together. But the events that go with the films was a project that I began when I started the job. And so our closing weekend film is called Breaking Bread, and it's a documentary about the Ashams Food Festival, which was started by the first Arab person even, to win the Israeli, I think it was Top Chef, but some big Israeli cooking competition.
Was it Top Chef or Master Chef?
Master Chef, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So she started a Levantine food festival where restaurants get paired with a chef. And it's the way the film talks about it is there's an Arab chef and a Jewish restaurant, or vice versa.
Okay.
So it's all to preserve traditional ancestral Levantine recipes and kind of breathe new life into recipes that might be sort of endangered. So this is the closing film.
Wow. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And I immediately thought of some people that I would love to bring in to add even more depth and also interaction into this film. So you were just speaking about there's all kinds of Jews, and I think one that really gets marginalized is Arab Jews.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends who are in process of reclaiming their Arab identity alongside their Jewish identity. They're saying, my ancestors spoke Arabic. They lived in Arab countries. We were, enmeshed in culture together. And why is that not part of my identity?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really excited to be recording an interview with my friend Hadar Cohen, who's a Mizrahi feminist, facilitator, educator extraordinaire. And she'll be sharing about her family's history, who some of her family has lived in Palestine for over 200 years, pre-Israel.
Sure.
And she was born in Jerusalem. She also has lineages from Syria and Iran, I think Iraq. So she's going to talk about her family's memory of coexistence before the state of Israel, because this film talks about kind of a vision for coexistence in the future. And she's going to talk about how do we draw on memory of coexistence as we're dreaming into the future. And she's also going to talk about her process of reclaiming Arab alongside Jewish.
That sounds so cool. That sounds like it'll be a really interesting conversation.
Yes. And then on our last day of the festival, our friends Dor and Ophir Haberer, who are Moroccan, Israeli American culinary artists, will be teaching a live cooking class on shakshuka, on its origins, on how it's transformed and mutated and spread, and teaching us how to make it live together so that we can actually break bread together on Sunday the 31st.
And shakshuka has become one of those very, I'd say, almost trendy dishes.
Has it?
It feels like it has. Like I've, it's been on menus at places. Like it's, feels more out there in the, in the foodie world more recently.
Well, Baruch Hashem, it's delicious.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So let me ask, transitioning sort of out of the film festival, but sticking with you as an artist, how does your art and your Judaism and your queerness all sort of intersect together, and how do you think that's gonna sort of help you elevate this position to what you want it to be?
Wow, I love that question. I really feel like I can't even separate those things.
Okay.
For one thing, I think my way of being Jewish is very queer. That I am
say more about that.
Yeah.
How do you mean?
Queering lines of denomination and binaries of ways of practice.
Okay.
So I grew up at Bet Shalom, which is a Reform synagogue in Minnetonka. And I was always a seeker, and I actually had a really formative rejection by the conservative movement because my mom had never converted formally. She practiced Judaism with us, and I had a bat mitzvah and all the things. And I didn't even know that patrilineal descent was an issue until I was 14 and not able to participate in a USY kala unless I had a mikveh. So that was a really formative moment for me. And I, at that time, decided I didn't want to be part of a community that didn't recognize me. Mm-hmm. So, but that drove me to try to find communities of practice that were really joyful. I didn't know at the time that what I was looking for was lineages that were still inspired by Chassidut, by Hasidism, in its original sense. And I was looking for these communities that were using lots of Hebrew and song, and that there was a lot of joy in the practice and a lot of ancestral connection to tradition, but that were also progressive and feminist and welcoming of LGBTQ plus folks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I eventually was led to, by beautiful synchronicities, the Jewish Renewal Movement. And I got involved with them. That was while I was studying at the Arava Institute in Israel. And I participated in a program through Livnot Ulehibanot up in Sfat. Okay. That's when I was introduced to Jewish Renewal. So when I got back, I was studying at McAllister College. I looked up Twin Cities Jewish Renewal, and I got connected with the folks there, led by Terry Gips. Which, side note, now my father is involved in that community and just led their book club discussion on This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. And he never expressed interest in this at all when I was starting to explore it, but it's really sweet to see him.
See, like he's ready for your return home. He's getting involved.
Yep. So I found Jewish Renewal, and through Jewish Renewal, I found Kohenet.
Okay.
The Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, through Kohenet Sharon Jaffe, who is the first Kohenet in Minneapolis. And that really propelled my journey. So they were starting a new cohort for ordination, in January 2015 on the West Coast. Previously, it had only been on the East Coast.
Okay.
And I was graduating college and I needed to go be where all the earthy Jews were. So I made my way out to the Bay Area, which is also a big part of how I became a filmmaker, which I could say more about that. But I guess the really brief version is that I was collaborating on a documentary about that journey, and I ended up needing to take on more and more of the editing process. And from there, I became a filmmaker.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so I found myself in the Bay Area where, for a lot of people, Jewish life does not look like paying dues at a synagogue and you go to that synagogue and that's your Jewish life. We have Urban Adamah, which is a Jewish urban farm and apprenticeship training program in Northwest Berkeley. We have Wilderness Torah, who I became very involved with and have taught and led ritual and mentored youth with. And they have Passover in the desert festival, Sukkot on the farm they had in the past. Now they have high holidays that I was just at. And it's all outdoor camping, renewal inspired ritual. There are also lots of just people hosting Shabbat in their home. We have some amazing rad synagogues. I can look out my window right now at Kehila Community Synagogue that has multiple trans rabbis. And there's
so
also
cool.
Chokhmat Halev in Berkeley, which is a renewal synagogue, also has a trans leader. And there's just such abundance and variety. And there's a large swath of us who move between all of these different things. And then there are moments where we all come together, like the Tikkun Leil on Shavuot at the JCC. Everybody goes to that. Or Purim at Urban Adamah. Pretty much everyone turns out for that. At least, I shouldn't say everyone in this, little world that I'm thinking of. But I will note that there are definitely a lot of Jews of color and Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews who still are finding their own ways, but not feeling fully welcomed into those spaces. So that's really our work to do in that community. But anyway, my own personal practice that has come through all of these last 7 years and my lifetime is, I think, maybe aligned with alternadox, which is a term that I first heard through Rabbi Joshua Bolton. I love his poem, "After all that's happened, I meet God halfway." And the entire poem is things that he does do and things that he doesn't do in terms of halakha and in terms of Jewish participation. And I had my own B'nai Mitzvah tutoring program, and I would do this poem. I would study this poem with my students, and then I would have them write kind of their own, what are the ways that they do connect with Judaism and what are the things that they don't take on?
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So I feel really liberated by my experience of being able to have way more contact with people who are Orthodox or just who observe halakha at a level that I was I was led to believe growing up in a Reform synagogue that wasn't for me, or that I couldn't do it without doing all of it.
Right.
And that is not the case as I've experienced in the Bay Area. So I can, we're recording this on Simchat Torah, and I laned from the Torah this morning on the Torah that lives at my house with a minyan. So both of these things get to be true. So the intersection of Judaism and the arts and queerness is also kind of my place of greatest inspiration, because there are so many queer and trans Jewish artists right now making queer Jewish content that it just gives me an endless source of inspiration. So I'm thinking about Linka Flegel and Dory Midnight, many folks from the Kohenic community. There's a really rich international community that I feel part of in creating often ritual art or art that helps us to reclaim part of Jewish life that we've been kept out of, or expand something, or bring it to people who haven't experienced really the magic of it before. I feel very rooted in that community of queer trans Jewish artists. And that's definitely something I want to bring to my role at the JCC, is bringing in this world that I think is under-tapped for and has a lot to offer mainstream Judaism and Jews who might be longing for more connection and more liberated ways of connection to Judaism.
For sure, for sure. I think that's I think it's going to opens up some really interesting opportunities for whether it's, you know, stuff with film or it's stuff with music or gallery showings. I think there's a lot of real interesting opportunities there for you to bring that into into our community here.
And I think that the way that I, like I said, queer the boundaries of denomination and religious practice, I think it puts me in a good position to be part of our pluralistic community at the J. And it really does support my motivation to find ways for us to connect across all of these different ways of practice.
Which is great. Perfect. All right. Yeah, I think you make interesting points, and you know, I'm not sure we have the time to get into this now, but you know, denominational Judaism is a challenging place, at least for me personally. It sounds like it probably was for you as well in a lot of ways. So I think it's I think it's fascinating and exciting to hear of different ways to figure out your practice that fits within the ways you want to do it and around the people you want to do it with, and that it works for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's great that, you know, we're in a place where that happens, and hopefully that travels back to the Midwest with you.
Amen. And you know, it's an ongoing navigation even in my own home, which is a queer and trans Jewish co-op.
Okay.
We have a large variety and spectrum of Jewish practices. And so this is just something that we navigate ongoingly, is how do we make sure that everybody gets their needs met and isn't feeling like they have to do it this way because this person's doing it this way, but how can we live a Jewish life together? Like most weeks we make Shabbat and Kiddush together and all these things. But it requires some kind of maneuvering, and it's a bit of a dance, but it's a good dance to be in.
Well, that's awesome. And it's awesome that you find your people out there that you can do that dance with.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking for my people in Minneapolis, so hit me up.
All right. Well, as soon as you get back here, whenever exactly that's going to take place, but I assume soon, we look forward to you finding your people. Last couple questions, Riv. What is your favorite Jewish food?
Oh, my favorite Jewish food. Well, that's sort of a loaded question, isn't it?
It usually is. I'm not gonna lie.
Honestly, I was just looking at pictures of all of the chalot that my friend Jessie has made over the last year or two, and I just love challah. I love challah with salt and butter and honey. Like this time of year.
Yep.
Doing with butter and the salt and the honey. Oh,
so you're talking about like honey drizzled on, or honey like as part of the dough, or
no,
both,
drizzled or both.
No,
but
both is good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent.
That's sweet and savory.
Yeah. No, that is good stuff. And obviously, nothing wrong with challah. I mean, it's challah.
It's a classic.
It is a classic. You can't go wrong. And what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh my God, that's not fair.
Yeah, that's why I never can remember which order I asked them in. I think usually I end with food, but for you, I wanted to end with holiday because I figured that might be the one that sparks something.
I mean, truly whichever one is happening next, but also I do really love Sukkot, which was kind of new for me coming to the Bay Area. And that was one of the things about these blurring of distinctions, was that so many people have their own sukkah here. And that was just not a custom that I grew up with, which is also probably in part because of the weather. But the experience of sukkah hopping during Sukkot was really a joy. But I think I am going to go again with the classic, which is Shabbat, because it comes every week. The liturgy is lit, and you get to sleep in and rest and just be with the people that you love, be present, go outside, go for a walk. It's just so important to have that, for me, to have that reminder every week that part of the creative process is rest.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is nothing wrong with the classic. Not when it comes to food, not when it comes to Shabbat. There's
and
nothing
you get
wrong.
them every week.
And you get it every week. That is, almost always the next holiday up. So it does that answer does sort of work for you, because it is almost always next.
I'll say one more that I love is, it's not actually a holiday, but the whole month of Elul, which is the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah.
Sure.
And I now really partake in the custom of blowing the shofar every day. And I have this little sort of havara that we blow it at least once a week on a mountaintop or a hillside together early in the morning. So I love singing slichot and blowing the shofar in the month of Elul.
That is a cool tradition as well. And you're right, not technically a holiday, but I love the tradition that you created, though. That sounds amazing. Oh, Riv Shapiro, thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to see what you're going to be doing in the future with the JCC and the cultural arts producer role that you take on. And best of luck with your move back to the upper Midwest, and look forward to meeting you in person when you get here.
Thank you so much. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.